My name's Collette Bryson and I'm a career coach. So I'm going to talk to you today for 20-25 minutes about CV preparation. So it's something that everybody dreads. Nobody really loves the job of doing their CV. And I've seen good ones, I've seen bad ones over the years. So from that experience, I'm going to give you my top 10 tips. So before I get into that, the first thing I want to cover is what even is a CV? Why do we do it? Why are we asked for it? What's the purpose of it? So two things really. The purpose of your CV is not to tell everybody your entire life story. Your entire life story doesn't need to be in your CV. And if you're finding that your CV is getting very long, then you need to look at it again. You don't need to put your life story in the CV, because the purpose of the CV is to get you in to interview. That is the one purpose of the CV. So if you can imagine you're in the employer's shoes and you're looking for a candidate and you got loads of applications, you're using the CV to shortlist who you're going to interview. So remember that the CV doesn't get you the job, the CV gets you the interview. The interview then, completely different set of skills, the interview gets you the job. So think of your CV like your glossy brochure, your marketing brochure. So if you were going out to buy a new car or a new washing machine, you'd pick up the brochures, and the brochures would be quite brief. They wouldn't be going into all the technical detail, but they tell you all the great things about the product that you're thinking of buying. So in this case, you're the product and your CV is the glossy brochure. So you need to think about it like that, because just some statistics to think about. Your CV might get about 8 seconds reading time. So because on average there might be 250 applications for a job, and out of those 250 applications, about 5 people are going to get interviewed. So the odds aren't great at getting through. So your CV has to speak to somebody in a few seconds. So it can't have loads and loads of words, and it can't be all busy. It has to be brief and to the point, and it has to be clear to show them exactly what they want and to show them exactly what you have. So before I get into the CVs again, or the tips, I just wanted to cover this briefly, because people often ask this: do I send a cover letter or do I not send a cover letter? My advice always is, if you have an opportunity to send a cover letter, then do so, because it's another opportunity to introduce yourself. It kind of introduces your CV. Say something in the cover letter that will pique the reader's interest. Pique the reader's interest so that they want to read your CV. So if you are sending a cover letter, try and make it personal. So try and find the name of the person to whom you're sending the CV. And be specific. Remember, they could be someone in a large HR firm. They might have lots of jobs. So make it easy for them. Tell them which job it is that you want to apply for. If there's a job reference, use that. Direct them to where you want them to read in your CV, what the most important thing that they need to know, that you have to tell them. So highlight those key terms. State your interest in the job. I'm really interested in this role. I'd love an opportunity to talk to you. So it shouldn't be too long, shouldn't be a rehash of your CV, and it should be the same style, font, size, all of that should look the same. So the next time you go to send out a CV, I want you to think about who is reading it and what are they looking for? What do they want to find? Don't forget, the employer has a problem that they want to solve. They want to find the right candidate for the job. So you need to tell them how you are the right candidate for the job, or at least the right candidate to get in the door to interview. So who's going to be reading your CV? So it could be one of these people. So it could be a recruitment consultant, a HR manager, an employer directly, or it could in fact be a robot. So some firms and some portals will use software called applicant tracking software to scan your CV before a human being ever gets to read it. And that robot is looking for keywords. So if your CV does not have those keywords, your CV does not pass go. It doesn't get through to the next stage. It doesn't even get to a human being. So be really conscious of that when you're sending a CV, particularly to maybe a large online portal or a large company or something like that. So the other people, the recruitment consultant, the HR manager and the employer, they're all really busy people. They've all loads of jobs and loads of tasks and loads of things to do, particularly the employer. He or she doesn't want to spend time recruiting. They want to spend time in their business. The HR manager could be dealing with loads of vacancies. Oh, sorry. Is that better? Is that okay? So the recruitment consultant could be dealing with loads of vacancies for loads of different companies. Is that okay? But so I can't hear what. We try and get this right. Is that okay? So make their life easy. Make it easy for them to pick you, to put you forward. The HR manager is going to be dealing with loads of things in the employment sphere. They're going to be dealing with maybe payroll, disciplinary matters, onboarding people, as well as recruitment. So they're busy. Make it easy for them to read your CV and make it easy for them to choose you. So, with that said, I'm going to get into my top 10 tips now. So, the first one means a lot more work for you guys. Edit your CV for each and every role that you're applying for. So, if you have one CV, if you've one master CV, maybe you've spent ages on it, maybe it's gorgeous, and you're sending that one CV off to 20 different jobs, you're doing yourself a disservice. You're being generic. You're not being specific to the job that you're going for. So each and every time, so remember that one CV does not fit all job applications. Tailor your CV to each job. So what I do when I'm doing this for clients is I print off the job spec, I print off the CV, and I literally go from one to the other to see, does the CV have those keywords? Is it saying the key things that the person reading it needs to know? I underline them and I make sure I put them in. Obviously, if I can stand over them, not going to put something in if it's not true. So try and match your CV to each job spec. Now, it does mean more work for you. It means you've got to be really careful about your filing, because if you're invited for an interview, you want to make sure you're looking at exactly the same version of the CV that the employer is looking at. So you've got to keep a good organisational system there. Another quick tip there is always keep a copy of the job advertisement. What I do is I copy and paste it and I save it in another document, because if you go to the link, you have an interview tomorrow and you go to the link tonight and it's gone, they've taken it down, and you're really stumped then for interview. So keep it with your CV, keep the two things together. So what to leave out of your CV? Like I said earlier, you don't need to put every single thing about you in your CV. You don't need to put your life story in there. So I would say you don't necessarily need to put your own postal address on your CV. Gone are the days when you're going to get an invitation to an interview in the post. You're going to get a phone call or an email. So they don't need to know where you live. It's none of their business, for starters. Secondly, it could put them off. So if you are living on the north side and you're applying for a job in the south side and someone sees your address, they might think, they're not really going to take this job. So anything that might elicit a bias in the mind of the person reading it. So that goes for dates of birth, marital status, anything like that doesn't go into a CV. Anything that could be a discriminatory ground. Also, anything irrelevant doesn't go in a CV. So ask yourself why you're putting a certain thing down. So an example I had from a couple of years ago was a lady who was a qualified yoga teacher, but she was going for a job in HR. So how would that be relevant? It might be a disadvantage. It might make them think, oh, she's not really interested in HR jobs. She wants to go off and teach yoga. She's not going to stay. So what we did in that case was we put it into her hobbies. So because it could cross over maybe with wellness and things like that in HR. Jobs from years ago don't have to go in as well. I always say one summer I had a job picking mushrooms in a polytunnel. I'm not putting that in my CV unless I'm going for a similar role now. So summer jobs, short jobs, jobs from 25 years ago, they're probably no longer relevant. You don't need to put them in. So concentrate on the more recent history. References. All you need to put is references available on request, or in fact, you don't even need to put that at all. So don't use up your precious white space on your CV by putting names and contact details for references. They're needed later on, and if they need them, they'll ask for them. Have a couple of people in mind and have asked them, permission to use their name as referees, but you don't need to put them on a CV. Hobbies and interests is always a bit of a controversial one. Because some people will say, sure, it doesn't matter. But I like to see something personal about somebody in a CV. Gives us a little bit of a flavour of you. Don't forget the employer, wants you to be able to do the job, but they want you to be a nice person and fit in as well. Also can be used to illustrate skills that you don't have through work. So, for example, finance, if you're the treasurer of the Parents Association or the GAA club or whatever. So you can use it to illustrate other skills as well. And it gives that little bit of interest about you. But make it interesting. Give them a little bit. Don't just make it blah like everybody else says, reading, traveling. Say a little bit more about it. This is a tip I want you to think about for a second. I want you to think about the email address you're using for your CV. Does it look professional, or is it a joke, a nickname, your date of birth? I've seen things like that. I've seen John and Mary at aircom.net and all kinds of things. So make sure your email address looks professional. It doesn't give a bad impression of you, because it can result in your CV going in the bin in 3/4 of cases. Really easy to set up a new email account, and maybe a good idea to have a specific one for your job applications so you don't miss anything that's coming in. So it's really easy to get a new one. So think about that. Make sure you're using a professional looking email address. Your CV should start off with, apart from your contact details, a nice, snappy profile introduction about you. Don't just launch into your last job. Introduce yourself. If your CV gets 7 seconds or 8 seconds reading time, they may only read the portion at the top. So make sure that engages them, makes them want to read on, shows the value you bring, your best points, gets those key words in. Anything that's key, anything that you can boast about, put it in there. Also look to the job advertisement for what is essential. So usually in a job it will say the essential requirements, or the ideal candidate will have, will be a qualified accountant. So say you're a qualified accountant, and in the top line of your CV, don't have them to wait to read your qualifications, which normally would come on page 2, to find out that you're an accountant. If you need to be an accountant for the job, put it up there, front and centre. Anything that you can say about figures or statistics is always good, because it jumps off the page. So if you can say, led a team of 10 or managed a budget of 2 million or whatever it is, it jumps off the page. But have that nice intro paragraph. The rest of your CV, succinct, ideally no more than 2 pages. Nice, clean, clear font and formatting. None of your curly letters or anything like that. My advice, nothing fancy. I had to advise somebody yesterday to take his headshot out of his CV, and he had bright blue bands running through it. Just looked a bit garish. Black and white, normal font is good. not too small, readable, so that they can skim down through it. I'm a big fan of the bullet point because I think it makes it really easy to read. And be wary of using waffle or jargon in your CV. So jargon, first of all, just because you know that you use the ABC software system or whatever it is, don't assume that the person reading it knows what it is. So don't talk in jargon from your industry or your company. Be clear about what you're talking about. And a CV, you just simply cannot waffle. If it's not needed, take it out. If it sounds too long, shorten it. You have to be like, your CV is like reading the news headlines. It has to be nice and short and snappy, and there's a certain skill to that. Look at the language you're using on your CV. I see CVs all of the time that are lists of responsibilities. Try and avoid that term if you can. Just because you were responsible for something doesn't actually mean that you did it. So focus on what you did do and what you did achieve. So the results. What results did you get? What did it mean that you carried out that task? So if you go home today and Google action verbs for CVs, you'll find lists of them online. So good, strong verbs. So back to school, what's a verb? A verb is a doing word, or anything you can put I in front of or ing at the end. So I managed or managing. So instead of saying was responsible for or worked on, try and use a stronger verb. So there's a few examples there. Managed, collated, completed, negotiated, implemented, organised. Sounds much stronger. And if you can, then put in an adjective as well, a descriptive word. How did you manage it? I strategically managed it. How did you calculate it? I accurately calculated it. I successfully negotiated it. So if you can give real life examples and real life results, that will really improve your CV. So managed a team of 5. Actually, I have a couple of examples coming up on the next slide. And be wary of repeating yourself as well. If you find a word you like and you use it over and over again, just be wary of that. What I often do is I just use the thesaurus to find another word to mean the same thing. Avoid the cliches as well. You know, if you're the employer and you're reading 100 CVs and they all say the same thing, it's going to sound a bit boring. So avoid using the well-worn statements like, I'm a team player. That's fine. You might need to be a team player, but find a different way of putting it. Say you're collaborative or something else. And as I say, avoid was responsible for. So just some examples of how you can strengthen some of the statements on your CV. So the ones on the left there are okay. They're fine. There's nothing wrong with them. And if you gave me a CV with those on it, I would say that's fine. But you could make them better, make them stronger. So responsible for budget, working with key stakeholders on projects, that's fine. But how about estimated and negotiated appropriate budget figures with key stakeholders, successfully delivering project within budget and on time? So it tells us what you did. In the left one you were responsible for, in the right one you did it within budget, you did it on time, you estimated, you negotiated, it's more specific. So team manager also responsible for recruitment of team members, could be recruited and managed teams of up to 8, get the figure in there, built strong team relationships resulting in, so what was the result? What was the impact? What was the achievement? Resulting in increased productivity of 8%. And you got a figure in there as well, so it hops off the page. Even when it comes down to your hobbies, say a little bit more. So if I said I volunteered with the park run, it might mean I turned up one Saturday 2 years ago and I didn't turn up since. So if I can say I do it twice a month and I've been doing it for 2 years, that's a bit stronger. Even things like reading, or traveling, put something interesting in there. Be prepared to answer the question, what are you reading at the minute, if you put reading in your CV. So that can knock you off in an interview if you don't have it. So how do you put your work experience in your CV? So very, very generally speaking, you'll use a chronological CV where you go backwards. Your current job, your job before that, your job before that. There is a different way of doing it that can sometimes be helpful if you have a gap in your CV, or you have worked for years and years and years for maybe one employer, and you want to take that emphasis away from that, and that's a functional CV where you pull out your skills. So you have your paragraph, then you talk about your skills, and then you have your work experience just really in a list. So you talk more about the skills than the roles. Not all jobs need to be listed, as I said. Old jobs, irrelevant jobs, short jobs, summer jobs, temporary jobs don't need to go in there. So ask yourself, how relevant is this to what I'm applying for? So apply the so what test. And if you've loads and loads of jobs, say you've worked in loads of different shops, or you've done loads of small contracts, it's okay to put them under a heading like various retail jobs, contract work, prior career. Even if you want to mention your historic jobs but you don't want to give them too much space, you can just say prior career and list the jobs. So what about a gap then? People are always really fearful of a gap, and I think too much emphasis is put on people who have career gaps. Life happens, things happen, people have gaps. How do you deal with it in a CV? So the first thing I'll say is consider that functional CV. If you're going back to work now after a gap of 5 years and you put your last job, it's going to bring emphasis to the fact that your last job was 5 years ago. So consider using the functional CV where you don't list that first. Do you mention it at all? If it's long ago, and the longer ago it is and the shorter it is in time, the less relevant it is, you can get away with not even mentioning it at all. If you want to mention it and explain a gap, you can put a simple one-line explanation like career break, travelling, study. If you've been made redundant, that's not your fault. And in fact, I just used the phrase that I tell people not to use there. You were not made redundant. Your position was made redundant. Sometimes I think it's a good idea maybe to explain that in a cover letter, especially if you're coming back from redundancy now. So because the main benefit that you have there is that you're available for work. You're available immediately. Somebody else might have to give in their notice. So a cover letter might be a good way of approaching that. If it's something more personal, you were ill, or you're carrying responsibilities, or you're minding your kids, do you say it or do you not say it? Be wary again of those discriminatory things that I mentioned earlier. You don't want to bring attention to something that could even plant a little seed of doubt in somebody's mind. Obviously nothing wrong with being off for those reasons. Just be careful how you phrase it. What you want to do is be positive about that gap. So you want to say that you learned something during that gap, or that if the gap is now, that you're ready to go and you can start on Monday if they want you, and you're enthusiastic and you're ready to get back to work. This is another bugbear of mine, and I hate it on CVs, using I. Just take it out. So if you say, I implemented a new account system, just take out the I. Implemented a new account system. Remember that snappy, you want to be snappy and succinct. Take out the I. It's too casual, it's too like a conversation. So I implemented a new account system could turn into successfully implemented a new account system on time and within budget. Even when you're talking about yourself, if you want to say you're enthusiastic, you just say enthusiastic person. Makes it more snappy. So that's 9 out of my 10. Number 10 is really simple, but you'd be amazed how many people do not do this. Please, 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 whatever you do, before you press the send button, and it's really tempting to press that send button, print out a copy of your CV and read it line by line by line with your finger if you have to, or even better, give it to somebody else, somebody with an eagle eye. If you have a grammar mistake, a spelling mistake, a typo, a punctuation mistake, somebody reading that could just say, no, not interested. Especially if you're saying you have great attention to detail and things like that in your CV and you've spelt something wrong, it's just a no-no. You often don't see it yourself if you're working on the CV, on the screen, for a long time. You don't see those things until you look at it in hard copy. So step away from the CV for a bit, come back to it, review it again, or give it to someone else. Quick word just on layout I mentioned earlier. You want to have your name and contact details, obviously. Your profile paragraph. Then you may want to talk about your skills, then your work history, company position, and I like the dates to run down the right-hand side of the page. If somebody's skimming it, they see it quite clearly. Then your education, again, qualification, awarding body, date, so BA, History, Trinity College, 1999. You don't need to give, unless you're a recent graduate, you don't need to give loads of details of the subjects you did and all of that. Same with Leaving Cert. If you've a certain amount of years behind you in work, you don't need to say what you got in your Leaving Cert. In fact, I would leave it out. Any other training then that you did, in-house or otherwise, hobbies and interests, references available on request. You can flip the education and the work history around, particularly if you've done something recent, you can put that first so that it's nice and clear. So that's, pardon me, that's a general layout for CV, but the main thing is clear and readable. So just to conclude, if you remember this, I've mentioned it a couple of times, your CV, make it snappy. And snappy stands for succinct, watch out for the things that are not necessary or not relevant. A is for your strong action verbs. P is keep it professional. You got to use professional language and it's got to look nice as well. The other P is for positive. Everything in your CV should be positive. There should not be any negatives in your CV at all. If you're tempted to put something negative in, just take it out. And Y is for you. So if you remember back to your glossy brochure, you're the product here. You want to get in the door to interview. So the CV is the place for you to talk about yourself, to talk about the great skills and qualifications and experience that you have and package it all together in your lovely, shiny, glossy brochure and get in the door to interview. So that's my tips, ladies and gentlemen. That's where you'll find me. I am out here today as well, but if you don't get me today, you can book in for a complimentary Zoom call for 15-minute quick chat. So thanks very much.
Together for Collette Bryson. I would